Hello. We are working on a narrative unit. And the first thing that we need to think about with our narrative unit is the structure of the story. So we know that narratives have really 6 parts. Okay, our very first part, the beginning of the story, is called the exposition. 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 And you see the root word there is expose, because in the exposition, the author exposes us to the characters, the setting, and the problem. But the more academic way to say that is the conflict. So the exposition is where the author exposes us to the characters, the setting, and the problem or the conflict. That is our first part. So that's the first part of a story, a narrative. The second part is actually where it curves right here. And this is where the character is deciding to solve their problem or starting to solve their problem. It's the beginning of the rising action, but it specifically has to do with a decision. A decision to solve a problem or to deal with a conflict. Okay, so then we have rising action. And as we know, rising action have to do with the events of the story. So the rising action is when the character tries to solve their problem or goes through certain steps. First they do this, then they do this, then they do this. That's the rising action. And there's some tension there. We're waiting for something to happen. We're wondering what's going to happen. And then we get to the fourth part of a story, a narrative, up here at the top, called the climax. Now, we say the climax is the exciting part of the story, but that's not always the case. I mean, sometimes the excitement in the story happens in the rising action or even in the falling action, though not as often. The climax is called also a turning point. And if you look at the way the plot map, it goes up and then it goes down. So this is the turning point. Something happens in the story. Something happens with a character in the story that means there's no going back. Things are different now. Things have definitely changed. That's the climax. That's the turning point. So when you're asked to find the climax or turning point of a story, think, when did it change so that there was no going back? And now the character has the falling action into some sort of resolution of their problem or how they're going to handle their problem. So I just said the next part, the fifth part. Here is the falling action. 4 is climax. So falling action, wrapping the story up. Because if it ended at the climactic moment, we would feel disappointed. We want to know how the story ends. Is there a happily ever after? And how did the characters handle the end of their story or this part of the story? So again, that's called the falling action. And sometimes this can be a very short part of the story, and sometimes it's longer. So falling action / and then, the last part, the resolution. So that would be the sixth part. If you'd like to know an advanced way to say the resolution, you can say denouement, which is a French word. Denouement, which is how the story ends, the resolution. Okay, so the happily ever after, the next steps, that's the resolution. So today let's look at Exposition. The Exposition in Papa's Parrot by Cynthia Raylant. We're going to be annotating together, so take notes as I take notes. Though his father was fat and merely owned a candy and nut shop, Harry Tillman liked his papa. So in that sentence, I see clues. I see clues about the character and the setting. So what characters do we see? I see the father. I see Harry Tillman. So I have two characters. And because of the his father, I'm thinking Harry Tillman is our main character. So I'm going to say he is our main character. Now I find out some things tone-wise, the tone of the story. I have the word fat, and of course we know, I don't have to tell you, that that's not a kind word. We could have said that he was big-boned or jolly like Santa Claus, but the word fat, not very kind. And merely means that's all he had. It's not really enough. So when I see those two words, I see there's a tone, and I can write that on the side of my paper, that the tone, T-O-N-E, the tone is critical or negative. And I'm going to move that over to the side margin. I know it looks super weird there. So the tone is critical or negative. Yeah. You can write yours on the side. Mine's not quite fitting. So then I have the word though. And I see though his papa was fat, though there's some negative things about the dad, Harry Tillman liked him. Okay. So even though daddy's not perfect, the son likes his dad. I'm already seeing some idea about what the conflict might be. Next sentence. Harry stopped liking candy and nuts when he was around 7 years old. But in spite of this, he and Mr. Tillman had remained friends and were still friends the year Harry turned 12. Now, it might be hard to imagine not liking candy or nuts, at least for me. Okay, but that they had, I'm saying the past tense, remained friends. And now how old is Harry? So if I stopped right there and I took some notes about the exposition, what I would say is I know that the main character is Harry. He's 12 years old. And he doesn't necessarily like what his dad does for a job, but he pretty much likes his dad. For years, after school, Harry had always stopped in to see his father at work. We got a little typo here. Please put your period there. There's a sentence there. Many of Harry's friends stopped there too, to spend a few cents choosing penny candy from the giant bins, put a comma, or to sample Mr. Tillman's latest batch of roasted peanuts. Okay. So, although Harry doesn't eat the nuts, he goes in after school to see his dad, and his friends come there too. Mr. Tillman looked forward to seeing his son and his son's friends every day. He liked the company. Now, if this were your first time reading the story, you could maybe make a prediction. What might the problem be? When Harry entered junior high school, middle school, though, so something's changing, he didn't come by the candy and nut shop as often, nor did his friends. They were older, and they had more spending money. So more money to buy things other than just candy and nuts. They went to a burger place. They played video games. They shopped for records. None of them were much interested in candy and nuts anymore. A new group of children came to Mr. Tillman's shop now, but not Harry Tillman and his friends. Okay, so we see here that Papa liked company. And we see the name of the story is Papa's Parrot. So what will the dad do for company now? Because his son doesn't come by as much. Right, he'll probably get a parrot. So as we continue the story. The year Harry turned 12 was also the year Mr. Tillman got a parrot. He went to a pet store one day and bought one for more money than he could really afford. He brought the parrot to his shop, set its cage near the sign for the maple clusters, and he named it Rocky. So now we have a third character. We have Rocky the parrot. Mr. Harry thought this was just the strangest thing his father had ever done, and he told him so. But Mr. Tillman just ignored him. So now I have 3 things on tone here. The father is fat. The father merely owns a candy store, right? And he can barely afford the parrot, and that this is a strange thing his father had done. So now we have the problem. So let's make sure that we circle that, and we're going to write next to it that this is the problem. This is the conflict in the story. Let me change colors to blue. So this is the problem. The problem is that Harry thinks his dad's weird. His dad's being strange, but Mr. Tillman isn't going to change. So to review, in the exposition, we find out about the characters. We have the father, we have Harry, and then we get the parrot. Okay, we find out about the setting, that we're in a candy shop, and it seems like we're kind of in recent times. We have video games, but then it says records, so maybe 30 or 40 years ago. Okay, so we have characters, we have setting, and we know something about the tone. There's a little bit of a criticism here, which leads us right to our problem or our conflict, which is that the 12-year-old Harry thinks his dad is being weird, talking to the parrot all the time. And that's called the exposition. How do you spell it? E-X-P-O-S-I-T-I-O-N. The exposition, where the author exposes us to the characters, the setting, and the conflict of a narrative.